Okay, thank you all for being here this morning. In order to discuss S-1982, the Comprehensive Veterans Health and Benefits and Military Retirement Pay Restoration Act of 2014. Behind me, you see, and in this room, representatives of over 20 veterans and military service organizations who have voiced their support and are working hard to see that this legislation is passed. And when you visit the Senate Veterans Committee's website, you will see the very strong letters of support from nearly 3 dozen veterans and military organizations. So I think it's fair to say that this legislation has extraordinary widespread support from veterans organizations who represent millions and millions and millions of men and women who have put their lives on the line to defend our country. And I just want to say a word of thank you, not only to the men and women who are here supporting this legislation, but to the millions of veterans whom they represent. And this legislation was not written by me, that is for sure. This legislation, in fact, was written by these people, because we have hearings, and it will have hearings, joint hearings for the House and the Senate, where all of the veterans organizations come forward. And they say, these are the issues that we are struggling with. This is what we're hearing from our membership. Please do something about it. And we have listened very carefully to the issues raised by these organizations. We have listened carefully behind closed doors, in private meetings, in public hearings, in letters that we receive from veterans all over this country. And we have also worked very hard in the Senate Veterans Committee to do our best, and we're not perfect, but to do our best to try to create bipartisan legislation. And in this legislation, which I believe is the most comprehensive piece of veterans legislation to be offered in decades, please understand that a lot of the provisions in this legislation come not just from Democrats or independents, but come from Republicans as well. As best we could, you have 2 omnibus bills in here passed unanimously by every member of the committee, and you have other pieces that were passed with strong votes, not unanimously, but with strong votes. And then you have some new provisions in there as well. As of this moment, and I think this is going to change today, tomorrow, we have 10 co-sponsors on this bill, including Senators Landrieu, Bega, Schatz, Brown, Blumenthal, Hirono, Heitkamp, Boxer, Whitehouse, and Gillibrand. And as I mentioned, I expect we're going to have many more before in the next couple of days. Let me very briefly, because these guys are going to get into it at greater length, just touch on some of the provisions in this 400-page bill. Number 1, there is the restoration of full COLA for military retirees. All of you are aware that the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2013 reduced COLAs under age 62 by 1%. We addressed that issue fully in this bill. One of the concerns that we have heard from senators all over the country is the issue of a complicated funding issue for new CBOCs. I believe CBOCs are enormously important in providing good quality primary health care to veterans. We address that. That means there'll be 27 major medical facility leases in 18 states and in Puerto Rico as a result of this legislation. This legislation includes groundbreaking provisions that would expand access to VA health care, including complementary and alternative medicine. An issue that has been raised time and time again within the veterans community and outside is over-medication to deal with pain issues. VA is doing a good job. We're going to ask them to do better. Furthermore, I believe, as do most Americans, is that dental care is part of health care. We begin the process of providing dental care within VA health care through a major pilot project. Some people know and some people don't know that as a result of the last government shutdown, we were 7 to 10 days away from disabled veterans and veterans who get pensions from not getting their check. Not an academic issue, For many disabled veterans, this is life and death. These are the checks they depend upon to pay mortgages and buy food. We were 7 to 10 days away from that. In this legislation, there's advanced appropriations for VA for mandatory accounts. That means we will never be in that position again if there is a shutdown. Everybody has been concerned, we have hearings on the issue, about benefits backlog, and we all agree that it is not acceptable for veterans to wait years to get the benefits to which they are entitled. They need adjudication in a reasonable period of time. We advance that proposition in this legislation. Many of the younger veterans who are taking advantage of the post-9/11 Veterans Bill are worried that if they move to another state, they are unable to take advantage of in-state tuition, and we address that issue in this bill. Veterans who served in Iraq and Afghanistan were guaranteed 5 years of free health care. For a variety of reasons, we think it's important to extend that to 10 years. We do that. Country still faces major economic problems. People come home from war unable to find a job. Major provisions in this legislation for employment opportunities. We have all heard over and over again the horrendous situation regarding sexual assault in the military. We are helping to address that issue for people who come home and have access to VA health care. And this was inspired by Ruth Moore, who struggled for 23 years to receive VA disability compensation. Reproductive health, one of the tragedies of the war, is that men and women who come home are unable to have babies, and we are working on a provision to help it make easier for them to get the help they need to do that. Extension of the Caregivers Act. A couple of years ago, we passed a major piece of legislation for post-9/11 veterans to make sure that those people who are taking care of disabled vets get support. This expands that to all families. How much does this bill cost? How is it paid for? This bill authorizes $15.2 billion in discretionary spending over the next 5 years. The mandatory spending provisions in this bill will total about $8.5 billion over the next decade. Over $4 billion of the mandatory spending in this bill is being offset by savings within the jurisdiction of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. The remaining $20 billion will be coming out of the OCO fund. Last point that I want to make before I introduce our speakers is, if there is one thing that I have learned since I have been had the honor of chairing this committee, is that the cost of war is a lot greater than most people think. And the cost of war, just say recently, is not just the 6,700 men and women we lost in Iraq and Afghanistan, as tragic as that is. It has to do with the hundreds of thousands who are coming home with TBI and PTSD, of wives whose lives have been shattered, whose husbands are never going to return, our kids who are never going to see their parents. The cost of war is real. And I know that every Veterans Day and every Memorial Day, politicians all over the country go out and they give great speeches. Well, you know what? I think it's time to put our money where our mouths are. We can never repay what people have put their lives on the line to do. You never can. We're not going to bring back the dead, and we're not going to, bring back arms and legs. But we do have a moral obligation to do everything that we can to protect those people who have defended us. And that is what this comprehensive legislation is all about. Let me introduce now Norb Ryan. Norb is president of the Military Officers Association of America. Norb, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everybody. On behalf of our 380,000 members, I really want to thank Chairman Sanders for his leadership this morning in putting together this very comprehensive and thoughtful bill. We all know that there's a tremendous demand out there for the things that the chairman listed, whether it's caregivers or access. But I think there's a greater demand from the American public to know, is this country going to keep its promises to the one weapon system that has never let this country down, its men and women in uniform? And that's what I think this bill does very clearly, is it says we are going to keep our commitments, our solemn promises to that 1% that have kept the rest of us secure for the last 12 years. And I can think of nothing more important than making sure that we're walking the walk, that we are going to keep those promises. And I think one of the first things that the senator mentioned was keeping our promises on commitments to those that are the core of the all-volunteer force. That mid-grade NCO, that non-commissioned officer and officer, have known nothing but war for 10 years. And now they're over in Afghanistan wondering, is it worth staying in to 20? Are they going to keep those commitments? And Chairman Sanders' bill makes it very clear that we're going to keep those commitments, that they're not going to lose $83,000 in retirement for this little small change, as it was called by some of the members that put this forward. And so this sets a very clear signal that the Senate leadership is fully intending to keep their commitments to this 1%. And this COLA initiative is just an example of all the others were listed there. So again, Chairman Sanders, I want to thank you not only for this thoughtful and comprehensive bill, but having a sense of urgency. These men and women are still at war, and people are talking about debating this for another 15 months. Why do we have to debate something that we know is wrong? Chairman Sanders' bill gives it that sense of urgency, and so we thank you, Chairman. And I'm going to introduce Lou Celli, the Director of Government Affairs for our great American Legion. Lou?
Well, thank you. On behalf of the American Legion, we would like to thank and rise today and stand in complete support of S. 1982 with Chairman Sanders. We'd like to thank the committee and the chairman for his strong leadership on this bill. The American Legion has a number of pillars that we support. One of them is the economic stability and economic empowerment of our veterans. The Vow to Hire Heroes Act is one of those bills that has been a proven piece of legislation that has helped veterans' employment. Veterans' employment has now been lowered to 5.5% from 7.7% last year. Just a testament to the fact that this legislation works, which is all the more reason why we need to make sure that we reintroduce it, get it passed. Things like education, as we saw last night in the House, 390 to 0 education bill for in-state tuition passed unanimously. That's also in this bill. The American Legion is very proud to have worked with the committee on a number of these provisions. We're happy to stand here today and offer our full and unconditional support for this bill. I'll be followed by Ray Kelly, the Legislative Director for the VFW. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. Again, I'm Ray Kelly, National Legislative Director for Veterans of Foreign Wars. I want to thank the chairman for introducing this bill, working with the veterans community. I also want to thank the staff for their hard work, tireless effort to put this together. 400 pages of legislation isn't easy to put together. A lot of coordination goes on with the folks behind us and them. So thank you. There's something in this bill for every generation of veteran. You can turn a page. There's always that idea of we're taking care of this generation, we're taking care of that. This covers every generation of veteran. VFW fully supports the provisions within this bill. I'm going to speak to one provision in particular, and that is the lease authorization for major medical facilities for VA. Currently, there are 27 facilities that are waiting to be authorized for lease. Most of those leases are community-based outpatient clinics. What that means is the current clinics don't have the capacity, aren't in the right location to serve the veterans in that community. These leases need to be reauthorized. This bill reauthorizes it. So in simple terms, this gives access to veterans, solves that problem. This authorization that has failed is in the past, there was a new provision in the scoring. This fixes that. VA will be able to move forward with these authorizations. We fully support that. We call on the full Senate to support this bill, work together in a bipartisan manner. Veterans issues are not partisan, they're bipartisan. Let's work together to pass this bill. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to introduce Joe Violante with the Disabled American Veterans.
Thank you. Again, my name is Joe Violante. I'm with DAV, and the DAV supports S. 1982. There are many provisions in this bill that are going to help disabled veterans, their families, and survivors. You've heard a number of them. The caregiver provisions, the leasing provisions will allow VA to open up facilities so veterans can go in there. There are provisions in here that will help to improve the claims process. The chairman mentioned one of them for military sexual trauma that will help individuals coming forth with those claims. There are provisions in here and important provisions that will set up, and I'm not a big fan of task force or commissions, but in this case, I believe these are warranted, and that would be to look at VA's work product credit that they provide to individuals, as well as a task force to look at training and retention. One of the biggest issues that we have been pushing for years is better training of VA personnel that are handling claims, and this legislation will do that. We appreciate the efforts to allow BVA to request video hearings, but at the same time allow a claimant to request and receive an in-person hearing, which is very important to us. We understand the importance of video hearings, but some veterans may not be comfortable with it, and this legislation would allow them that option to go with a personal hearing. Again, I want to thank the chairman, the members of this committee, and the staff who have put this legislation together. And as the chairman indicated, you know, we've identified needs that are going to help all veterans, dependents, and survivors. And this is a continuing cost of war, and I would encourage all members of the Senate to support this legislation. So thank you very much, Chairman. I'm sorry. I'd like to introduce Alex from the IAVA.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Joe. Again, I'm Alex Nicholson, Legislative Director at Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. And just very briefly, I want to reiterate that IAVA also enthusiastically supports this bill, because not only is it an extremely bipartisan bill that contains many, many provisions that are crucial for improving the VA, for improving the lives and livelihoods of veterans, especially Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, but this bill is something that we've been waiting for a long time. As Lou mentioned, or as Lou mentioned earlier, the House just last night passed one of the provisions within it, the in-state tuition provision, 390 to 0. You cannot get bipartisanship like that these days on hardly anything. Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America in particular wants to see this bill and this provision especially passed, and I want to tell you why real quick. Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, after health care and after having their families taken care of, focus on education, I think, more than any other benefit. And when a veteran gets off of active duty, or ETSs or EASs off of active duty, and has a life, has a family, has a house in a certain area, and can't use their education benefit because of a technicality in the GI Bill, that negatively impacts their future and their livelihood and their family. And so that's one of the reasons that we in particular have been focusing in on this provision, the in-state tuition provision. It's in this bill again. It just passed the House, 390 to 0. We want to see it pass as part of this bill and conferenced with the House. And I also want to express really quick appreciation for the Majority Leader, first Senator Harry Reid. Prioritizing vets is the right thing to do, and we understand that this bill is going to be brought up very quickly. We are appreciative of that. We know that there are other competing priorities, and we want to see this bill pass the Senate very quickly. We're appreciative of Chairman Sanders' efforts, of the staff's efforts working on this, of the Majority Leader's efforts and his staff, and we want to see this go through. It's the right thing to do for vets. Thank you. And after me, we have Rick Weidman of EVA.
Thank you, Alex. VVA strongly endorses the immediate passage of S. 1982. There is absolutely nothing in this conglomerate bill that any member of the House or any senator should hesitate voting for this bill and doing so quickly. It does all the things, a plethora of things that really need to happen and happen quickly. Wanted to particularly speak to the provisions having to do with military sexual trauma and with reproductive health. VVA has been fighting that battle since 1982, and it began with the creation of the Women's Advisory Committee at VA, thanks to Senator Inouye. But that still goes on. We're still not where we need to be in terms of counseling and doing remediation, identification, reporting of statistics, and reporting of what are you doing in order to assist these fine young people who've been subject to military sexual trauma. Adding to that, many people who are coming back from war will not have the ability to have babies, as the chairman said. And this wraps it all together in a package. It's the most comprehensive reproductive assistance, as well as assistance with adoption, that has ever been introduced in the Congress. And there should be no reason whatsoever from anybody at any point on the electoral spectrum from enthusiastically supporting not only this provision, but the entire bill. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Mr. Carl Blake from Paralyzed Veterans of America.
My name is Carl Blake. I'm the National Legislative Director for Paralyzed Veterans of America. I'm here today to offer our strongest endorsement for S. 1982, the Veterans Health Benefits and Military Pay Restoration Act. One thing that we're particularly pleased to see is that this legislation includes a provision that is probably of the highest importance to PVA and its members. That's an expansion of the Comprehensive Caregiver Assistance Program administered by the Department of Veterans Affairs to veterans of all eras, not just veterans that were injured after September 11th, 2001. PVA's members probably understand better than any group of veterans the importance that caregivers play for individuals who have experienced a catastrophic disability. And the fact is, there can be no real justification for denying veterans who have incurred a service-connected catastrophic disability access to the caregiver supports and services that are provided by this program. It's time for Congress to correct this inequity. We're also pleased that this legislation includes a number of provisions that we support, most of which have been addressed here already today. We have engaged all of our grassroots efforts. We are committed to seeing this legislation through to final passage. We now call on the Senate and ultimately the House to show their commitment to veterans and pass this legislation quickly. Thank you. And now I introduce Patricia Sands with Gold Star Wives.
On behalf of the Gold Star Wives of America, we proudly endorse S. 1982, the Comprehensive Veterans and Benefits and Military Pay Restoration Act of 2014. And we thank Chairman Sanders and his colleagues for taking this important step. As you know, the Gold Star Wives have worked on with this committee on a number of important issues that affect thousands of our members across the nation. And we were honored to ask for input on this important bill and was privileged to testify on the importance of expanding benefits for surviving spouses. Strengthening benefits and services for surviving family members has been and continues to be the primary focus for the Gold Star Wives of America. And S. 1982 makes great gains toward this effort. Specifically, Gold Star Wives of America testified last year on the need to provide dependency and indemnity compensation for surviving spouses with children and the expansion and the expansion of the Marine Gunnery Sergeant John David Fry Scholarship to include surviving spouses of members of the armed forces who die in the line of duty. We are pleased that the members of this committee agreed and the language was added to make surviving spouses eligible for post-9/11 GI Bill benefits. Finally, as a military widow, I know this bill will make a positive difference in the quality of our lives. I know my husband would be proud of the intent of this bill to step forward and safeguard his loved ones, just as he did when he stepped forward to serve our country. Thank you.
Summarizing, I think, first of all, thank you all for the wonderful testimony. Patricia, thank you very much. In one paragraph, what this legislation is about is keeping promises, and it's getting our priorities right. I have not the slightest doubt that, if this legislation were explained to the American people, that there would be overwhelming support for this legislation. People understand the sacrifice made by so many people who have defended us, and now it's time to defend them and their families. So I think we have overwhelming support, and I'm just very, very proud and grateful to have the support of virtually every veterans organization in the country, and folks here are representing millions and millions of veterans. So thank you all very, very much. Be happy to take any questions that anybody has. Sir?
Where's the Republican support?
We work. As of this moment, we don't have any Republican co-sponsors. We are working on it, and we look forward to having that.
But why not? I mean, I'm sure you've been working it. What have you been told?
Well, you can ask them. I mean, I don't, in case you haven't heard, it's a fairly partisan environment here. But again, I think if you talk to people on the committee, Republicans on the committee, they will tell you, they will acknowledge that there are provisions of theirs in here, and that we have worked in a bipartisan way. And I hope we will have. I mean, I hope we will, and I believe we will. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I know that you're intending to use extra funding, but the other funding is supposed to go away in 5 years.
No, it's 10 years. It's, the CBO has estimated, for budget purposes, $1 trillion over the next 10 years. The president has estimated about $260 billion. So if you look at the $20 billion that we are asking for, it's a pretty small part of that total. Yes, sir.
Senator, when you say that you're going to offset some of that work spending with
Yeah.
savings within your committee, what
I think these are things that have been done year after, nothing new, and Dolly can give you the details on it, but it's nothing new that hasn't been used in the past. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Do you expect this to be called up on Thursday?
That is my, I'm going to be I have been told that it will be up on Thursday, but we're working on that right now. Yes.
Earlier today, some other veterans groups raised concerns that the VA is already overrun and with backlog of claims and healthcare issues and wait times. Do you think this would add to that burden, or how do you think this would help?
No, I think it would reduce those burdens. We're going to give the VA the support that they need in many, many respects. And there's nothing that we're going to do in terms of opening up the process. We're not going to bring one person in, new person in, until we make absolutely certain that the VA can accommodate those people with additional staffing and such. Yes, ma'am.
This is a fairly large bill. Are you concerned at all that just by the scope and the number of things, that particularly the fact that you're looking at OCO funding, could possibly mean the entire thing gets dragged down because this is passed?
Look, you know, as I think people have said better than I do, our job is to listen. It's to address the real and legitimate problems that face the veterans community. And if somebody wants to come up here and say, well, you're wrong on this and you're wrong on this really isn't an issue, I'll listen to that. I have not heard one person tell me that any of the issues that we have put into this bill are not terribly, terribly important. And again, many of those, we just heard that in terms of the educational funding, passed the House yesterday, 390 to 0. We have that provision in here. There are other provisions in here that have passed the House, that will pass the House. So I think what my job is to do is to listen, and it's to get our priorities right, and that's what we have done. So I think it's a good bill. I think it's a strong bill, and I think it's a bill that's needed. Sir? We're working on that right now. I believe in amendments. I believe in amendments. I mean, I think, you know, the dilemma that we've had politically, if you say, okay, there's an amendment, and then somebody wants to bring forward 100 different amendments to essentially sabotage the bill, that's not acceptable. On the other hand, saying no amendments, that's not acceptable. So I think what sensible practice is, yes, bring forward a reasonable number of legitimate amendments on both sides, and let's go forward. That would be my belief. All right? Okay, thank you all very, very much. And again, let me thank these men and women here who year after year have done, in my view, an extraordinary job in representing the needs of people who have done as much. You can't ask more from what veterans have done for us, and it's our time, our turn to listen to them. So thanks all very much, and guys, thank you very much.